Morning. Is this thing on? Good morning. My name is Mike Graff. I'm the chairman of the governing board here, and welcome to our voters meeting today. We have some interesting things to talk about, some nominations and an election to the governing board, approval of the budget, of course, and then Pastor and Brian are going to run you through some things that I think are really interesting and kind of cool and show God's grace and abundance in St. Peter right now. So I'll hand it over to Pastor Greiner for an opening prayer.
All right, let's pray. Jesus, we give you thanks for today. It's better than at least I thought, maybe many of us thought. We're thankful for the sun and the warmth. We're thankful for the flowers and the trees and just everywhere we see your work in the world, and we're thankful for being part of that. We thank you for your work here among us and through us in this past year, and as we look forward to next year and what is to come down the line, Jesus, we're just excited for how you can use us to reach more people in this neighborhood, this community, across Chicagoland and across the world. And so as we seek to lean in even more to our work of leading people to a full life in Christ, we pray that you bless it. Use this meeting to that end. The conversations that we share, the decisions we make, Jesus, make them all pleasing to you and helpful to us for the work we have to do. So for everyone who is here, I give you thanks. For those who are maybe still coming, keep them safe. Get them here quickly. For those who wish they're here but have other things they have to do, bless them. Use them powerfully. For those who are not here because we haven't reached them yet, we haven't had an opportunity to share the gospel with them or show them tangibly the love of Christ through acts of kindness and mercy and generosity, Jesus, open our hearts and minds to them as well, so that we would be faithful to our calling and we would be productive in the work you give us to do. So for this, for everything, Jesus, we pray it all in your name. And everyone agreed and said, amen.
Thank you, Pastor. The first thing that we're going to do this morning, this afternoon, is the governing board election. Did everyone receive a ballot when they came in? Everyone? Anyone
Should
need
be
a
the
ballot?
small yellow ballot.
Small yellow ballot. And if you don't have one, raise your hand. Paul Mo, only get one. All right, one ballot. There you go. And then what we're going to do is, if you look at the board now, there are 3 members of the governing board that are going to be 3 spots for election. Brian O'Banion has completed his 6 years that he can serve on the governing board. And before we go any further, Brian, could you stand up? I'd like to recognize Brian. He is... He kept us in line the whole 6 years that he's been involved. If anyone got out of line, he kind of smacked them down a little bit and got us going on the right path, which if you've ever been at one of my meetings, we needed him a lot. So Craig Grant has finished his first 3 years and is up for re-election this year. And then Melissa Smith is dropping off of the board. She's involved in some, I don't know, postgraduate stuff she thinks she needs to spend time with. So anyway, for today, we're going to have an election for 3 spots, and there's 4 candidates for those 3 spots. And we're going to ask you to mark 3 spots on your ballot, and the top 3 vote getters will be elected to the governing board this year. So if you could do that now.
Yeah, one thing I'd also mention is on the way in, you should have received in your packet some bio backgrounds and pictures of the candidates. The other thing I would note is we actually had twice as many nominations this time around as we had actually on here. We had 8 individuals that were nominated. So we just want to thank everybody who was involved in the nominations process. The nominating committee is appointed by the board. It's headed up by the vice chair, in this case Jim Homily, 2 other members of the board, and then 2 members of the congregation who have a part in the kind of deliberation process to get down to a ballot that's manageable and the right kind of mix of people needed for the board. So these 4 individuals, again, you can read in detail. I just briefly say Carolyn Dolezal has served for the last year or so, maybe more than a year, I don't remember, on our foundation board. She's been a longtime member here of St. Peter, has some grown children, and has just done a wonderful job in that leadership role. Craig Grant, as Mike mentioned, has been on the governing board for 1 term. As we like to say, prior to that, he's served on every imaginable board he could find a way to get on, and and so he's a St. Peter lifer and loves serving in that way. Paul Hilgeman might be a newer name for some of you. He's been around longer than I have at St. Peter. He married into St. Peter through the Couts family. I see some representatives in the back. There's Paul. If you just want to stand up real quick, there's Paul Hilgeman. And so father of 3 boys and a girl, most of whom are at St. Peter already. And so has served on the board of elders for a term a number of years ago. So, Paul, thank you. Tim Stokel also is the last name you see on the list. Go ahead and stand up. Tim also has a couple kids in school here at St. Peter, and his wife Kathleen is present. Tim has served on our building committee and would be a great candidate for the board as well. Is Carolyn or Craig here that I didn't call yet? Carolyn Dolezal? No? Okay, so she's not able to be here today. So, any questions on the candidates or the elections process? Seeing none, then go ahead and, as Mike said, choose 3. And then once you have that done, we will ask Janet if you can round up a few friends from the back to collect them, and then we'll count them as we move forward with the meeting. So if you want to hand them maybe towards the middle, that would save a little bit of time. Yeah, Sharon, go ahead. Oh, we need one more ballot?
One more ballot up here. I'll go grab one. Janet?
In the basket there. So we'll get it sorted out in just a minute. Anyone else need an extra ballot? They have a change or an addition? Okay. There we go. Sharon. All right, one other thing I would mention while all these friends are counting the ballots is from those, John, can you take that and give that to Janet? From those who were nominated but didn't necessarily make the slate this time, what we would envision is keeping them in the kind of queue of future candidates that we would bring to the governing board when the time is appropriate and it fits their season of life. And then secondly, also other leadership opportunities on our foundation board, which is appointed by the governing board, and other teams that are formed throughout the year. So if I have the chair's permission, I'll just move on with where we are.
I guess.
Okay. All right. So a number of you attended town hall meetings, so some of what you're going to hear is going to be a little bit of a repeat, but many of you have not been able to. So we're going to condense down what we talked about in more detail at the town hall meetings, and we're going to cover that for the remainder of our time. Yes, Steve?
If anyone is interested in joining the crew that maintains the grass, contact Pastor, who will give you my number.
Even better, contact the church office, and I will make sure that they get you the information. But yeah, Wednesdays is when we normally do our grass cutting, and we're about due, so 'tis the season. But thanks, Steve. So by now, most, if not all of you, have heard that the call we extended for a discipleship pastor was returned to us. Pastor Brian West regretfully said, "I love you guys, I love your mission, love your vision," and it was really hard to do this, but in the end, God said, "I've got more work for you to do in Clinton Township, the Detroit suburbs." And what's interesting is he said in the end of it, as we were just talking through the process and the decision, he said, "I'm really sure, I'm confident, Micah, that everything that God has given you in terms of your vision, your dreams for ministry in Arlington Heights and Chicago and beyond, you're going to do it all, and you don't need me." Right? And out of that, as I was processing through that, myself with the leadership on staff, with the board, with others in the congregation, kind of 2 things have emerged for me that I would offer. One would be to say that the time has come for us to just start doing some of the stuff we've been hoping to do and waiting to do for this new pastor to come in and help lead it. Instead of waiting any longer, just figuring out how to start doing some of it. Specifically, what we're looking at is two things. One would be developing the comprehensive plan and strategy for making disciples here as part of a full life in Christ, and that is connecting with youth ministry, children's ministry, and adults in particular, where we know we don't have as much for life groups, missional communities, things like that we've been talking about for a little while, and we've just been waiting for this new person to come in and do it. We've said, God is saying to us, you already have what you need to get started, so just get started. And so we're going to look at some of our existing staff and volunteers, the leadership that's already in place, the people we already have, the resources we already have, and we're just going to get started with some of it. Now, the second thing would be there still is a need for additional pastoral support, just to help make St. Peter run at peak efficiency and do all the things we need to in terms of worship, in terms of baptisms, funerals, and all that sort of thing. And so the governing board will continue in the search process, maybe do some refining of the job description itself, maybe focus it a little more narrowly or a slightly different path, kind of depending on how the other part plays out, and then continue the pursuit of the right new pastoral support to join our team. So we're in that discerning process now where we're listening to Jesus, we're listening to one another, and we're seeking, all right, Jesus, what did you teach us, and what's the next step in this regard? And that's kind of the direction we find ourselves on. Any questions on that in terms of the pastoral call process? You guys are all happy? No? You're just waiting for the vote. You're like, what is it? No. Okay, second call process you're probably aware of is for a new school principal. That is because Bruce Rudy will be retiring at the end of next school year. And let's see, are any members of the principal call committee here? Would you stand up? I see Kristen Drake. We've got Brian Booth. We got Matt Meyer. Co Ginder is in the lobby, so she's kind of coming on in. We have, thank you, friends. You guys go ahead and have a seat. Melissa Smith is the co-chair of that committee along with Brian Booth, and have done a great job of starting the process of collecting names, defining the position that we're seeking. All of this is available on our website, by the way. And we've done an initial round of interviews. Early on in the process, we had hoped that we might be able to bring in the successor candidate for part or all of this next school year. That's quickly becoming clear that it won't be possible for a variety of reasons, including the great candidates that we're talking to are already committed to their current school for the next year. They have kids, a couple of them that are seniors in high school. They're not going to move them for their senior year, but they would be open to the possibility for next school year. And so what you can envision is over the course of the next 6 to 9 months, maybe we'll continue the search process. If you have any additional names you want to forward to the committee, you can send them to me, or better yet, directly to Brian or Melissa Smith. And what I can say is there are some really great candidates out there that we're considering. Bruce is going to finish strong in his last year here, and then we're going to make the best effort to have a smooth transition for the subsequent school year, which would be 1920. Okay? Any questions on the principal search process? Nope? Awesome. All right. Praise reports. What we wanted to do in this meeting also is just highlight a few things we're especially thankful for. You'll hear that as a recurring theme as we go throughout. A couple of things I'd point out initially would be we're just doing some awesome stuff right now with our Comfort Dog ministry. And that includes Stephanie Keller, who is in the house. Stephanie, you want to stand up? Yeah, as our new top dog. There we go. That's awesome. Many of you know Stephanie. Brad's in the back. As Brad and Ginny are leaning in now, he's got one. Who's you got, Susie? Right now, yeah. Brad and Ginny are leaning now into being caregivers for their daughter-in-law and their grandchildren who will be moving into their house in June. He and I were just talking this morning, and so Brad and Ginny have a new season of life they're focusing on, which means a little less in Comfort Dog. Still going to be involved, but a little less. And so Stephanie stepped up to be the point leader for that, the top dog. Andy Wool, many of you will know. I'm not sure if Andy's here. I don't see him right off the top. Retired Arlington Heights police officer. Is getting involved in opening doors through those connections, which are awesome. And two of our dogs, Susie and Jacob. Susie is triple vested, which means comfort dog and canine service dog, which helps with the military veterans, and then also a police something or other certification. I never remember that one. Stephanie, is there a term I'm forgetting? No. Police. Care 9 I forget, but I got right this time. No, okay, never mind. All right. All right. So, but in all three of the areas. And then Jacob is double vested, Susie, that's not common for many comfort dogs to get that level of certification and training. It's really awesome, and it's a gift for us. And you'll hear a little bit more about how we've been able to be blessed by it coming up. Another thing I just wanted to just celebrate is in our care ministry, Pastor Paul is doing a great job raising up and using volunteers to do all sorts of great work, including deacons. Any of our deacons in the room, would you go ahead and stand up? We've got John Sommerfeld, we've got Dale Dippin here, we've got Dave Moss. Let's just give thanks to God for these men. And not with us right now would be Henry Kogler, who's traveling with his wife in England and Germany right now, a much desired and needed break for them. You can follow that on Facebook. And Dick Larson, who I don't see right now. But what these men are doing is going along with Pastor Paul to learn a little from him about how to love and care for people, to multiply the impact of our care ministry by being present even more than one guy could. And so thanks, Pastor Paul, for your discipling and leadership in this area. We really appreciate that. And for the men, somebody have asked, can there be more? And it doesn't have to just be men. The answer is yes and no. Right? So yes, there can be more, and if you're interested in being part of the care ministry and serving as a deacon or deaconess, talk to one of the men you see listed or talk to Pastor Paul directly, and he'd be happy to follow up with you on that. Again, this doesn't take the place of pastoral visitation and care, it adds to it, right? Which is really quite awesome. One more thing we're really excited about in the area of Pastor Paul's ministry would be a Night to Shine event on February 8th, 2019. How many of you know who Tim Tebow is? Right? Most of you know who Tim Tebow is, right? Tim Tebow, tremendous Christian athlete. He has established a foundation. And out of that foundation, one of the things they do is they sponsor these events, and it's all around the country, hundreds of locations. It's a party that we throw for people with disabilities and special needs, often who get overlooked, and so maybe didn't get to go to prom on their own. And so what we're going to need is a bunch of you and a bunch of other friends to volunteer to help and support this event. Our target is to have 75 people with special needs matched up with 75 friends who will be part of the party with them that night, and then a bunch of others, I imagine, to help run the event. And we get support, financial support, and other strategic support from the Tim Tebow Foundation, but we're going to look to a lot of you as people who can help out in this. So if you have any thoughts or questions, Pastor Paul is the one to talk to you about that. It'll be a powerful night. We'll host it here in our Life Center on campus. Okay? Another thing that we've just been really blessed by recently is our partnership with Westgate Elementary School through Kids Hope USA. How many of you have heard something about Kids Hope USA? All right, so some of you have. Okay, Kids Hope is a national Christian organization that connects one local church with one local school, and within that, volunteers from the local church meet for 1 hour a week with one student who is their mentee, mentors and mentees. We're not tutors, we're not counselors. We're not praying with them or doing Bible study because it's a public school, and so there are boundaries we respect in that regard. But we do have a chance to love and care for people who may not be getting that at home or in other parts of their life. Brian and I have two brothers, Israel and Aiden, 4th grade and 3rd grade. Israel and Aiden were born to their mother when she was a teenager. I think Israel when she was 15 and Aiden when she was 16. Their father tragically died in some sort of gang-related violence in Mexico a few years ago. So they don't have a dad, don't have a stable role model, male role model. And so Brian and I, just for a few months, have been doing lunch with them, playing sports, playing games, helping with a little bit of homework here and there, but otherwise just being present and loving them. And it's been fun to see already in just a few months some of the progress that we've been able to note. Like last week, for example, we were there, and it was beautiful, so we went outside with them and played catch with a football, and then all their friends started running out to them because it was recess time on the playground, and they were able to introduce us as their mentors. And they were like, "What are mentors? How do we get a mentor? That sounds so cool," right? They get this special friend, and then they're like, "Are you guys NFL players?" and we're like, "No, but we might be related to some. Actually, not really, but." And so we were just all-time QB, and we were having a fun time with these kids. And Jill, in the picture here, her mentee, her student, Alyssa, suffered a broken hip. I'm not really sure how, but couldn't come to school for a while. And when she found out, she said, "Man, I'm not going to see her. We're coming to the end of the school year." She asked the counselor we work with, Annie, "Is there any way I can visit her at home. And she said, let me see. And so connected her with her mom. Long story short, she got to go visit her at home. And on the way there, or before she went, she called me and she said, Mike, I'm going to go. I'm really nervous. Like, what do I say? I don't want to say anything that's taking it too far. And I'm like, tell you what, call Pastor Paul. He knows what to do. And then what she found out was that Alyssa had suffered a trauma in her past. And as part of the legal process with that, she was being asked to tell her story to some authorities. Without getting into any specifics, what I'll say is that she was assured at the end of it she'd be able to spend time with a service dog. And so that was like her hope. She was going to go through this storytelling of a painful memory, but she was going to get to see a dog at the end. Well, for some reason, the dog didn't show. And so she went through the process, and then she didn't get her time with the dog. And so I don't know if she knew that going into it or not, but in any case, she asked Pastor Paul. He said, yep, I can come. And they brought Susie. So she got her own personal home visit from a comfort dog, which was just off the charts amazing, right? At the end of their visit, Mom says to Jill, hey, would you pray for us? Which, again, we can't do in the school, but we were invited to do there. So she was able to pray with them and found out they're from Syria and don't have a local church. And so she said, hey, tell us about your church and what you do there. We'd like to come once she's healed and ready and able to come. And so we may end up seeing the family here at St. Peter. Now, that's not the ulterior motive to this, although that may be the fruit that comes of it, maybe. One other thing I would say is a week and a half ago, we got the news that a fifth grade student at Westgate School died. It was a young girl who had had a genetic defect in her heart from the time she was born. And so they knew this, but they'd been managing it. And she had an episode, went into the hospital, and ended up on life support. And at the end, the doctor said, we've done all we can do. And her parents made that painful decision to take her off life support. Right? And this is the first time that they've had a student die while a student at Westgate School, at least in recent history. And so Annie, who you can see laying on the floor with the comfort dogs there, calls up Jill, they're now friends, and says, man, this is what happened. It was just kind of processing through it with her. And out of it, Jill and Brad, I don't know, did you go on that Friday? Did you go to Westgate with Jill on that Friday? So a few others did. Barb and Sharon, maybe. I'm not sure who you're pointing to. What's that? Debbie Cooper did? Yeah, okay. And Becky Stalen, yeah. So they went on Friday, right after they announced to the faculty and the student body that the student had died, and then came back on Monday morning when all the students were re-entering. And so they were just thrilled. And I got this text from Annie, and I've been exchanging texts and emails with her and the principal there, Brad. And Annie said, of course, I'm not going to find it right now. Here it is. She said, thank you so much for your generosity to our school. You guys are always so available and kind and go above and beyond to support us, which is so amazing as you have your own school community to support. I hope you know what an effect your people have had already on our school students and staff. We are blessed to be in partnership with you. And the principal, Brad Carter, also said to me in another email, he said, I just thank God that we have this connection with you, St. Peter, because you've helped us already in so many ways going through this season of grief. And so we're just thankful to God that He created this partnership and this opportunity. And I remember thinking, they're asking the question, how do you have the resources and the time and the energy to love a whole nother school, right? And I thought to myself, here's our opportunity to give them a glimpse of what life with God is like, who has a limitless source of grace and power and mercy and love. And we just get to be the channels, right? The conduits through which God shares His love in the world. And don't know what it's going to mean. I just know that we have 13 mentors. Most, if not all, will be back for next year, and there'll be a chance going into next school year for others to join that. So if you're interested, you can chat with Jill Sheets, who's our Children's Ministry Director and who oversees this. So that's all in terms of the praise reports, just because I could keep going on for a very long time, and it is the afternoon, and it's a beautiful day. So we're going to stop right now. And Mike says, that's good, because I was going to pull the plug, right? Do we have an election, by the way?
We had an election.
We had, yeah, I mean, is it official? Let's go ahead and announce that then. And
Elected to the governing board for a 3-year term are Carolyn Dolezal, Paul Hilgeman, and Tim Stokel. There we go.
Let's give thanks to God. All right, let's say a quick prayer about that before we move on. All right. Jesus, we thank you for giving guidance and direction to our ministry through this decision. We thank you for all the men and women who are part of this process, for those who were on the slate and those who served. Thanks for Craig and his willing service these last 3 years, and thanks for Carolyn, for Tim and Paul, and their new service to this congregation. We pray that it would be abundantly blessed, and we ask this all in Jesus' name, and everyone agreed and said, amen. All right, next up, I'm going to hand it over to Brian, who's going to give a financial update and introduce the budget for the next ministry year.
So it's not always fun at these kind of meetings to stand up and talk about the budget, especially last year. We were facing what was an uncertain budget. We were looking at a potential deficit due to some of our tuition not coming in how we hoped it would. But this year is a different story, and so we're excited about how God has been working in our ministries, as Pastor was sharing, and also in our finances and kind of our strong home base that we've been talking about. So it's really been a season of God's blessing and favor. Just at our Jogathon event the other night, someone was sharing with me, man, it just feels like there's this positive kind of vibe and energy and buzz around here lately. It feels like God's just up to something, and we agree. So we are forecasting a surplus for this fiscal year, 17 and 18. That's due primarily to strong giving that's come through our church, so we thank you for the part that you've played in that. We've been forecasting just about $75,000 over budget for this fiscal year, and it's looking like this will be the first time in 10 years that we'll reach the $2 million mark with our offerings. So basically, since the recession, this is the first time we've been able to get back to that mark, which is great. Like Pastor mentioned, Pastor West declined the call. As much as we would have loved to fill that role over this year, not doing so helped us financially in the end. We spent this year just really looking across the board at what's mission critical for us budget-wise and what's not. What are the areas that we can decrease spending? So we've done things like renegotiate contracts, eliminate some contracts, bring a lot of work in-house that we had contracted out. We switched insurance providers for our liability and property. That saved about $15,000 a year. So just things like that we've been able to do over this year that have saved us tremendously in our expenses. And then it was also a great year for the markets and for our St. Peter Lutheran Foundation. We were able to distribute over $500,000 to the ministries of St. Peter through that. If you want to learn more about that, that's on our website, so fullifeinchrist.org/foundation. It details where all those grants have gone and tells you more about the foundation. So then looking ahead to this next fiscal year, 18-19, that starts on July 1st, we're budgeting a surplus of $26,000 before depreciation. And there's several factors that have helped us get to this balanced budget, even after facing what was a potential deficit in this year. One of the main ones is strong enrollment and tuition for this coming year. Especially in our early childhood department, we currently have a wait list for 5-day, full-day preschool, as well as our PDO 2- and 3-year-old program, where we were a little bit lower this year in that. So that's really helping our tuition be bumped up and helping our financial picture across the board. We want to let you know we do have a second full-time pastor included for the full fiscal year, even though the call was declined. That wasn't something we wanted to just take out of the budget or delay any further, because we still want to move that forward. We're budgeting for continued strong giving from our church, and then we've also been able to create an operational endowment through our St. Peter Lutheran Foundation. There's $5 million of assets there, that most of which have to go towards specific uses. What we've been able to do now is create this operational endowment that the earnings from it and some of the principal as needed supports our ongoing operations and annual budget. So for this coming year, we have about $40,000 planned. If the markets do better, it could be more, but $40,000 that'll come straight into our operating budget. So this will be a great step for our church and our ministry for years to come. So we thank the foundation board and the governing board for the role they helped play in setting that up. We do have a few areas that we're still hiring for, so we identified a few key administrative needs as well as facilities needs, and so we're in the process of hiring that. There's a few increased staffing costs in this budget due to that. And then our benefit costs, health insurance goes up 6% this year, which overall isn't terrible. And then we have a few people adding on to the plan, spouses or children that weren't on before, so our costs increase there as well. In this budget, we've included a 2% cost of living increase for all of our staff. We haven't been able to give that much in a few years, so that's great news. And then there's currently a few school staffing changes in the mix and that we have budgeted for. Again, as enrollment and tuition play out and get finalized, those are subject to change, but this is where we stand as of now. So our second grade class for next year is currently slated for 1 full-time teacher based on the enrollment there. And then our fourth grade class for next year is slated for 1 3/4 teachers. Second grade, we have Samantha Crow departing, so we're not having to eliminate anyone's position. As she departs, the other teacher will fill that role of the 1 full-time person. We also have Lexi Schmidt departing from our counseling position. We plan to fill that with 2 part-time roles, 1 focused on special education and 1 focused on counseling. And then we have Mia Larandi, our full-time teacher in Spanish, departing, and we're planning on filling that with a half-time position. So those are the current staffing changes, nothing too major. It kind of worked out well as some are departing to be able to decrease as needed. But again, that's all subject to change based on final enrollment. And then finally, our cash position, as far as having money to pay our bills over the summer. Sometimes those can be the leaner months with giving and tuition not being there as much. But this year, we don't forecast having to use any sort of line of credit or borrow anything to get us through the summer. So we're stable with our cash as well. Any questions on the financial update? Yeah, Missy.
What classes will be taking Spanish? Do you know? Is it going to be from or?
That's still kind of in flux. So Bruce and the leadership team are working on how that's going to look with a half-time Spanish position and how we can maximize who all still benefits from that. So I don't have an answer exactly who is going to get that and who's not. Yep. Yeah, Gary.
It looks to me like the operating budget is relying on foundation grants as part of the operating costs of the church. Is that a philosophical change made by the governing board and foundation board to use? What I thought were foundation grants were for capital improvement, things like that. It seems like it's built into the operating budget. Can you comment on that, please?
Sure. So the only thing that's built into the operating budget would be the operational endowment, which was created to do that. We do list the foundation grants on there as a way of showing what's all been given through the foundation. And then there's expenses that would show up below to cancel those out. So I wouldn't say that there's a reliance on foundation funding besides the operational endowment. That's the only thing we're kind of counting on for the next fiscal year.
12,000 is an operational endowment, different than the current endowment?
212 would include the operational endowment as well as the Lauron funding, which the foundation board has talked about counting on $150,000 moving forward. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, I'll ask Mike to come up, and if you got a handout on the way in and you're interested in more of the specific numbers, those are all there. But this was kind of a narrative summary of where we're at and what we're budgeting for next year.
Okay, so you've all had an opportunity to look at that and listen to Brian's explanation of that. I would entertain a motion to approve the budget. Anyone? Second? Second. Any further discussion? We'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you very much for that. And I will now turn it over to Pastor Greiner again. He's going to be short, right?
We'll see about that, yeah. So a couple updates on some key things in regard to our vision and direction. If you do need to move on, if you've heard this before, you're welcome to do that. So we're going to talk initially about where we're going. And back in the fall, we had a series with this title and with this image, Immeasurably More. And as we've been looking at this year and our dreams and our plans for it, this is one of the things we've become convinced of, is that God will do immeasurably more, especially in a few key areas. Making disciples, establishing and maintaining a strong home base here in the ministry in Arlington Heights, and then also reaching new people, both across the Chicagoland area and in Arlington Heights. And so we're going to continue to develop those themes, and you'll hear more about that as we move forward. Discipling, for example, we talked about in terms of getting started already with who we already have and what we already have, and so we'll do some work on that as we move into the summer and into the fall, starting some new life groups, training some new leaders, and that kind of thing. Strong Home Base, we've been blessed, as you heard Brian say, abundantly in this past season, and we see that as God's favor, and we look forward to more of it in the years ahead. And reaching new people, we're committed to that both here in Arlington Heights and growing our ministry here and beyond. 10 and 10, just a quick update on where we are with that. Earlier this year, we announced that there may be a location in the city of Chicago, in the Belmont neighborhood. We'll talk about that specifically in just a moment. But another thing we've said all along is that when we do this, we don't want to do it alone. That is to say, we want to seek friends who can partner with us, who bring expertise, financial support, prayer support, volunteer support. And out of that, back in March, Mike Graff and I sat down with leaders, pastors, and lay leaders from several area congregations who had indicated an interest in this project in particular and in our vision as a whole. And out of that, we saw these congregations saying, hey, we really want to get involved. We don't have the leadership or the capacity to start it on our own. We don't feel we need to. We'd be happy to join with you, and we like your vision, we like your ideas. But one of the things that became clear is they didn't really want to send checks to 111 West Olive to St. Peter, Arlington Heights, not because they don't trust us, but because they want to make sure there's a distinction between that work and then our salaries and our lights and our bills and so on and so forth here. And so out of that, we said, we see emerging a need for a third party, you might say, another partnership that could be the collecting point and then the strategic partner for the 10 and 10 vision, especially as we enter into the city of Chicago. Another theme that emerged was suburban life and urban life is markedly different. And there are things that work here out in the suburbs that may not work in the city, and there are assumptions in the city that aren't the same in the suburbs. And so we're solidly suburban, although some of you I know grew up in the city and moved out here. I didn't, so I don't really know anything about living in the city of Chicago. I just like to go there for dinner and go to the park or something like that and things like that. And but as a transplant, I have a heart for the city and see the need for vibrant ministries all across it. And so out of that, we were led to this new possible partner, 10 for 10 and 10, that is Link. Link is a national organization started out of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, based currently out of the Houston, Texas area, whose expertise is identifying individuals who will be catalysts for new ministries to get started in urban centers across the United States. They're active presently in Houston, in the San Francisco and LA areas, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Milwaukee, Cleveland. I think they've been busy in Baltimore and a number of other places, and then have some international presence as well. For years, they've been looking to get started with something in Chicago, but haven't had the right base of support to get started. And so that's where we kind of enter in, where we said, hey, we know we need partnership, we know we need friend, we know we need this third piece of the puzzle. Maybe Link would be the one. A couple weeks ago, we had the acting executive director, Dominic Rivkin, here to preach. And then on Monday afterwards, we held a meeting with about a dozen congregations represented who want to have a part in seeing ministries started and emerging in the city of Chicago. And out of that then, what St. Peter is saying is we'll be willing to be one of the first ones to help get this done. We see it as a great strategic partner in our work in the city, especially, and it makes sense for all the reasons I tried to describe a moment ago. And so we have already set aside some funds to get started through the foundation that we have been blessed with this past year. And so out of that, we'll help with some of the seed money for this, and then see where that is able to lead us. Hopefully, if things go well, it'll be up and running by this fall. And so after we're done with this set of meetings, my next step is to have the second meeting with these area congregations at one of our city churches and see if I can get people to sign on the dotted line and say, yep, we're willing to put money towards this, prayer towards this, support towards this. And then once there's enough, they would get started hiring a city director, and that person would be the key catalyst for working with people across Chicago to start new ministries to reach neighborhoods where there isn't yet a vibrant ministry presence. That includes the Belmont neighborhood and Trinity Mead. So between now and then, we'll need to decide, do we want to take possession of that campus, or do we want it to become a possession of Link Chicago? And we're trying to discern what's the best strategy with that. But one thing we do know is that already Link has connections with an Amharic African immigrant community that is already present in Chicago. Chicago is one of the largest places where they're gathering in the United States right now. They just don't have a church yet. There's already a pastor identified, Lutheran, who's ready to get started. They just need a place to meet. And we just so happen to know a place that's mostly empty and is relatively centrally located. And so what we see maybe emerging could be a church that could get started, that's already in the works, that we don't have anything to do with, but we just might be part of the people who say, here's a space, here's a place, get going. And they would come from across the city of Chicago, and they would meet there. Now, what we would also do is seek to start a child care ministry out of that site to serve the neighborhood. We're doing the background work on that right now. And out of that also, hopefully give birth to another congregation that would serve that local community as opposed to being a regional church. And so that's what we're working towards as we speak. So no action yet needed on your part. Just an update to say we're working on it, and there's some exciting possibilities coming. Any questions on 10 and 10 or Trinity and the work with Link? Yeah, David?
You don't think that was an accident, did it?
Of course not. Yeah. Do I think it was an accident? No. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. God's at work, and he's been behind it. Pastor Paul had a chance to go down and preach at Trinity Mead a couple weeks ago. And it's an interesting thing to have a church with four ladies who have been there for a very long time and have a certain way that everything has to be done. Right? Ray Pagels, if you want to ask him, went down on Maundy Thursday with Ilse Schmidt as their guest organist. So 3 undercover St. Peter operatives who got to scout it out and just have some interesting stories to tell. Now, all due respect for these ladies who have held the torch for this time, and they're getting ready to say we're done with that. And so we're trying to manage that moment in the right way to be the most responsible and not take on any obligations here that we're not ready to handle, right? Any other questions? Yeah, Missy, and then Linda, go first, yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Linda. What she said is she grew up not too far from there and remembers when Trinity was a vibrant, thriving ministry right on the corner of Reese Park. And so it's just excited to see a chance for new birth and a new opportunity there. It's been funny, as we went through the Why Multiply series a number of months ago, how many people came up to me and said on the way, coming and going, hey, I have a connection. I have somebody I know. I'm not sure if Paul Schmitz is still here. I thought he was at one point. I think Paul's the one who said, I was baptized in that church, right? And so just kind of interesting things that God is lining up. So, yeah, Missy. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. So I'll jump to that and then hand it over to Brian here in just a moment. So what Missy was saying is we didn't mention Community Threads earlier, but we probably should point it out just because we have an audience. So Community Threads was started by an alumni parent of St. Peter, Elizabeth Maring, and she has recently announced that she's retiring from Community Threads, moving to Michigan. She and her husband, Clarence, found a lovely house on the east side of Grand Rapids. She assures me I'm welcome to come and stay with her anytime, but we'll just see when that happens. And so what that means is she had to close down her season here and get ready to move there. And as part of that, approached us and the other affiliates and said, okay, here's my thinking. We have 3 options. Number 1, we can give the store to one of you, but honestly, we don't know that any of you have the desire, the vision, or the capacity to run a large retail store here. We thought about it. We looked close at it. Gary was involved with Gary Grome with part of those deliberations. And in the end, we said we don't think that it's central to our vision for reaching Arlington Heights, although we've loved it and the resources it's provided. And it's still a friend. Number 2, we could shut it down, and we could take the cash, and we could distribute it, and we could say, 7 years, it was a good run, that's awesome. We've always known that it wouldn't be there for forever. right? That's part of our conversation. Third thing, and this is the one we went with, was find a friend in the community who does really good at thrift stores and see if they'd be willing to take possession of it, run it, and ideally still have the partnership relationship with the 3 area affiliates. So that's us, the Orchard, and Urban Breakthrough Ministries. They ended up finding Sparrow's Nest, which runs several other thrift stores across the Chicago region, do a great job of it. None of them quite like Community Threads. That is to say, none with the affiliate, not-for-profit partnerships that we have, none to the scale and volume of either product or sales that Community Thread has. So it's much larger than any of the others. Now, their mission is not to provide money to schools. It's something different. It's to help the homeless, which is great, but it's not the same that Community Threads was initially. So here's where we are. They will give 1 additional round of grants later this year. That's their commitment and promise. And we're working with the leadership of the Orchard to convince them that we are indispensable to the success of Community Threads, with the result that through our volunteer support, our donations, and our shopping there, that there's something special they don't want to lose. And even though in the future our grants might still diminish, we can make that a slow fade and not a hard stop. Now, they don't have any obligation to us to do that beyond 2018. So our job in the rest of this year, St. Peter family, is to be good volunteers, donators, and shoppers, with the result that we can point to it and say, hey, look at all the good stuff that you get out of this, and then maybe we can figure out how to keep some grants coming. But at the end of the day, they may say, no, we want to go in a different direction, in which case we, in my view, would say, okay, it's another thrift store in the community. That's awesome, but we're not going to have, for example, as many donation drives. We may not have classrooms going over there and volunteering. I wouldn't say to all of you, stop, like there are enemies or anything like that, but understand that special relationship that existed due to that granting possibility changes. Okay? So most of you who volunteer already at Threads, you've already heard about this directly from Elizabeth and in other channels, but some of you may be hearing this for the first time. So any questions on that before we move on with other stuff? Yeah, Missy? So Missy's question is, would we be willing to do a rummage sale here since we don't have that funding source from Threads? What we've said historically is we're not going to do rummage sales because we have Threads. And so if we don't have any funding source from Community Threads in the future, we might consider that as another fundraiser or revenue generator in the future. But we haven't made any decisions yet because we're still trying to work the Threads angle. Right? So it could be an option that it wasn't really in the past. Yeah, Bob?
Yes, what line item in the budget was Community Threads? Was that under other income?
It was under scholarships because all of it was directed to scholarships historically. So in this fiscal year, we did exceptionally well in scholarships, largely because we got a larger than expected grant from Threads. What Elizabeth said is, Micah, I'm going to give them the checkbook next week, so I'm going to write you the biggest check I can this week. And so take it and cash it, right? Not that she didn't trust them. That's just who Elizabeth is. So we know that in the next years, the amount coming from Threads will be less, no matter what. Might be zero. Hopefully not. And so we've been working on other additional revenue sources. The operational endowment was one of them, although it's not directed exclusively to scholarships. It could be used for that or used for whatever else we think is helpful. The second source Brian didn't mention in this meeting, but he did in the others, was the state of Illinois now has a scholarship granting process by which individuals and corporations can make a contribution to certain scholarship granting agencies from which they receive a 75% income tax credit. At least this is going to be true as long as the current leadership is in place in Springfield, which, as you know, could change at any point in time. So for now, what that means is we can receive additional funding for families that meet the minimum income levels, and we have a number already in our school that would qualify, and that would be new funding with no strings attached from the state that we could use to help fund the scholarships that we're already giving out, and otherwise help the school as a whole. And so what we have next year in the budget is a little less vis-a-vis this year's forecast because we know that Threads will go down a little bit. We should get some already in the first half of the fiscal year. We'll work hard with some other scholarship fundraising efforts. and we'll try to make the most out of this new option through the state of Illinois. By the way, what I'm thinking personally is, I've talked to my tax guy a little bit about this, I may take some of what I already pay as state income taxes, and I may just give it to this scholarship fund once we figure out we're really confident in how it's all going to work. And I'll have to add a little bit to it, a third more, but let's just say I give $3,000, which I'd already pay in state income taxes, plus another $1,000, let's say $4,000, to this. I could effectively wipe out my state income tax obligation through the tax credit, which I'm going to pay anyway, so might as well give it to something. And the scholarship fund that I would give to would only go to Christian schools, which could include St. Peter. But it doesn't necessarily mean I'm giving to a fund that only goes to St. Peter. Does that make sense? So as we as we understand how all that's going to work, we'll talk to you more and more about how you could potentially take advantage of it. But the way I figure it is, if I could take that same amount of money, add on a little bit more, and then have it go to help Christian schools, that's pretty cool, right? Now, eventually, Springfield will catch on, and they'll realize that this may change some things, but it could work out for the good all the way around. Okay. Any more questions on threads or anything like that? Otherwise, Brian's going to update us on some of the reasons why the plans we're going to show you in a minute are things we should be talking about.
Just a quick clarification on the tax credit scholarships, you can designate it specifically to St. Peter.
Sorry.
So if you go through that process, you can, through the scholarship granting organization, tell them you want your donation to go directly to St. Peter, and it will, assuming that there's enough families to qualify to match the income coming our way. So I think it's clear from what we've presented so far that God is at work. It is a season of God's favor and blessing, but at the same time, there's kind of this reality as we talk about creating a strong home base. We have some major needs and repairs here that we need to take care of as we move into the next season of ministry. So we just want to share a few of those with you. We know the west parking lot is an issue we need to deal with. We got some quotes back in 2012 that lead us to believe it would cost about $400,000 to $500,000, if not more, at this point in time to get that all taken care of the way that the village requires. There's also kind of the slow walk up from the parking lot that we would love to take care of and make it a better experience for our families and people coming to church each Sunday. Then we have our sanctuary beams, which on the outside are rotting. We've done a full investigation of this, identified the issue. Basically, they're not going to fall down tomorrow or in the next few years, but it is an issue that we need to deal with in the near-term future. So we've identified several solutions and ways of taking care of that, and you'll hear more about that in a minute. The organ is an instrument we'd love to maintain and revitalize for years to come. To do that would cost $300,000 or more. To re-leather all the pipes, we're just past the age where that should be done, and so that's another reality we need to deal with. Then when you look at this space, our campus as a whole, but especially this space, just thinking about safety and security, the reality of the world around us, it's unfortunate, but we do need to think about that and be proactive and smart about how we're structuring our space and making it as safe and secure as possible. So we would love to take some steps to address that and make it a much more safe and secure environment. So beyond just some of those major repairs we know of, we feel like there's also some major improvements that we could make to our campus that would really expand what we've been talking about with making disciples, creating a strong home base, and reaching new people. So these are a few key areas to that. Our entrances and community space, we'd love to expand that, make that bigger and welcoming environment for our families and for new families coming in. Again, making our entrances more secure. Revitalizing and preserving this space for the next season of ministry. Looking at our infrastructure needs of IT and HVAC across the board. Creating some additional offices and meeting spaces. We're at capacity currently for our offices. And so as God does what we think he's going to do through us, we're going to need even more of that. The courtyard is a space that we would love to take more advantage of. You'll hear more about that in a minute. And then childcare. As we talked about, our early childhood program is growing and thriving, and that's going to be a reality for our ministry for the future to come. And so we would love to create a dedicated, state-of-the-art space that would be used for childcare. That helps us reach more families. It helps us create a new mission field where we have time to reach these families, get them involved in our school and our church, and teach them about Jesus. So I'm going to let Micah walk through. That's all great, but how do we get there?
Thanks, Brian. One of the things I would mention there before we carry on would be the child care piece at the end. Earlier, if you looked at the detail of the budget, you may have noticed that our enrollment and our tuition for next year is substantially higher. That is driven primarily by significant growth in our early childhood programs. So that's Parents' Day Out, PDO is sometimes what we call it. Julie's in the room, and so she's been shepherding this for a while, and she could affirm this. And 5-day, full-day preschool especially. In both areas right now, we are at capacity or beyond with waiting lists. And the simple fact is we don't have enough room to add the space that we need to meet the demand, especially in those areas. Kindergarten and first through 8th grade, they're okay, and they're fairly stable. We're always watching that and trying to grow that, but what we're seeing, especially right now, is growth in the area of early childhood. As we've moved younger and younger in the last few years, from 3, 4, 5-year-old in regular preschool classrooms to early 3s. That's somebody who turns 3 mid-year, so we get them in halfway through the year or something like that. My daughter was one of the guinea pigs in one of the earliest rounds of that a number of years ago. And then Parents' Day Out is there are great families in this community who are looking for a partner like St. Peter to help them raise their children. And we know that in the window of preschool especially, that's where we see the greatest opportunity for growth of people moving also into our congregation. Right? So right now we have a new member class that we weren't planning to do, but we had like 10 or 12 families that are like, hey, we're signing up for school next year. Can we become members? And we're like, well, do you want to wait for the fall? And they're like, we'd rather do it right now. We're like, well, okay, well, we'll just go ahead and do that. And so some record levels of new members joining the church, most of them young families. And what I've observed is that preschool and Parents' Day Out, early childhood, serves as this great entry point for us into the lives of families and their children. And if we could make that window bigger, starting younger, then that means not only do we have a base that filters into our school, which helps it in its stability long term, but also we have an opportunity to partner with families for a longer period of time. Instead of just a few years, now it could be 3, 4, 5, 6 years even. Assuming they don't continue on into kindergarten and elementary and middle school. And so we've been doing the preparations to move it down to 1-year-old Parents' Day Out program, but we're waiting on DCFS to give us even a visit to get the licensing process started. And we would love to go down even further into childcare for newborns and infants. Again, it would give us a greater window of relationship with these families and then build a stable base into our school. So it seems like it makes a lot of sense. But again, the problem is we don't have room for it right now. So what we're going to show you then is a series of concepts and plans that will help us get to some of this. Not all of it's perfectly fleshed out. There's not a lot specifically to show you in the area of childcare. We're still working on that piece, although it's going to be part of it. But addressing all the things that we know we need to do, Brian talked about, and then also, God willing, helping position us for future growth for the ministry here in Arlington Heights. So what I'm going to show you then is a series of concepts. We're not going to decide anything today, so don't worry about that. We've not committed to anything specifically, but these are some first go-rounds at ways we think we could address some of these critical issues and then position ourselves for growth in the future. Okay? So don't freak out. Don't overreact. Just listen, tell us what you think, give us some feedback, and then we'll take that, process it, and later on this year, we'll come back to the congregation and say, okay, here's what we've heard, here's what we've learned, here's what we think need to do next. And it'll include fundraising, a capital campaign. And so before we do anything in that regard, we ask the congregation's blessing and approval, and then it'll include some major construction work if we go anywhere in these directions, and that also will need congregational approval. So that'll all come later on this year. All right? So what you're looking at now then would be one solution that we'd like to start the conversation with, and that would be a significant expansion and updating to our lobby space, office space, and the sanctuary itself, as well as you'll see, enclosing the courtyard, making it usable space for the ministry. Right? So what you're looking at now would be the existing Circle Drive, Let's say we move the cross tower over to that, which we've thought about for a while but haven't actually done. What you see then is, in the dark color, is all the new or remodeled space. As you'd come into the circle drive then, you'd have a covered drop-off area. So if it's raining or snowing or anything like that, you don't have to worry about that. You'd be able to be dropped off and step right inside a secured vestibule entrance into the facility. As you work your way around the sanctuary, you see there's additional space off either of these wings, and then the lobby office area also extending across towards Highland. One of the reasons we'd consider this is addressing the sanctuary beams, which, as you know, protrude outdoors and as a result are exposed to the weather. And so one of the thoughts was, instead of just fixing them and leaving them in that state, what if we brought them indoors and addressed them in the structure of the new space, and then also gained some highly desirable new space to be able to support the worship life of the congregation and the rest of what we're doing. So off in this direction and in that direction, then there would be new rooms. The stained glass windows would kind of move up into those higher windows you see there, and I'll show you a floor plan of what it could look like moving forward. This then, as we work our way around the campus, now looks in on the west side to an enlarged office area with another drop-off. It's not shown on this rendering, but there would be a circle drive potentially there. So you'd be able to drive up, drop somebody off. There would be some new handicap parking just along the west side of the building here that we could add so that anyone coming into our building wouldn't have to take a step up or walk up a hill to be able to get indoors on either side, right, which would be really significant. Actually, now that I say that, I'm not sure what we'd have to do in terms of slope on that side. But on this side, it would be at grade level, right? So there would be some steps or ramps on the circle drive because it's a little bit lower. So then the plan for that itself, right? You can see in this view on the left, that little circle drive, some of the handicap parking potentially. On the right, you see the cross tower and the existing circle drive. Let's zoom in on the sanctuary itself. So as I said, on either side of these, there would be new space that could be used for the choir, for a band. It could be used for children's services for Advent and other times of the year where we have big services in here. We'd have the possibility to take out all the asbestos tile that's under your feet, deal with that, put in a hearing loop throughout the whole space. Right now it's just the interior sections, but we could get that fixed for everything. Updating the heating and the cooling, getting our lighting actually tied into a system that allows us to control it all the time. Right now we've got a bank that's not cooperating, and so sometimes you've seen it goes on, it goes off. That has to do with a stopgap measure we took to fix the lighting a little bit, but we could complete that. In the back, Jason's in our booth, which is doing a good job. We would envision moving that back into the spot where it's now stone walls. That's one thing to mention is that maybe most of the stone walls would be removed. There'd be some left, but that would allow us to have more floor space and access to the storage rooms, which you'd have altar guild, you'd have acolyte robes and communion assistant robes and other worship-related storage on the same level instead of having to go up and down the stairs behind the altar. You notice also that those stairs are gone. The stairs from the basement get relocated, and the spiral staircases in the back also get replaced by stairs that would be built out into the lobby, right? Now again, we've not committed to anything. We're just saying that this is one possible solution. Over there towards my friend Bill Kaditz and friends in this section, that, if you could imagine, would be a brand new entryway into the room that would connect to the circle drive drop-off in the main lobby area, which we'll see in just a moment. So part of the goal in this would be to update and preserve the facility. All the stained glass would stay, right? So don't worry about stained glass. The organ gets fixed and better. We have the potential to add a console on the floor so that you don't have to be upstairs. You could have the organ played from below. We could potentially add some additional antiphonal ranks to the organ to make it even better for the future, which would be kind of cool. And we'd also double or triple the number of emergency exits, right? So here's one of the realities. If we had an emergency, even right now with the number of us in here, evacuating this room would be a problem, right? To get out those emergency exits, you have to go up and down stairs. That's a bottleneck in the back. And as you know, the pathways down the aisles and along the pews are really, really tight. And so one of the things we're thinking through is in the unlikely event of an emergency or an evacuation, how quickly can we clear this room in a safe and organized manner? And then also, how easy is it for people, young and old alike, to get in and out on a daily basis? Right now, what you can see, most of you in the room are sitting on the ends. And that's because it's not easy to shuffle, right, sideways down the aisles. And so we'd look at breaking apart the pews a bit, having more ends, and then filling in the gaps with chairs for the big services, Christmas, Easter, and other things like that, where we need maximum seating capacity. So there's no fixed plan for how that would look, but we'd have an opportunity to consider that. And then back in that room behind the sound booth, there'd be a quiet room so parents with young kids could step out, still be part of the service, but not be out in the lobby where it's easy to get distracted. Okay? Any questions on these concepts and ideas for the sanctuary itself before we move on to a few other areas? Yeah, Ilse. Yes, so whatever we do, we'd have to add elevators, and we'd envision them in a couple of places, one potentially just outside in the new lobby office area, and then a couple potentially down by the gyms in the courtyard that could be enclosed, right? So I'll try to point those out a little bit later on, too. Yep, Bill, yep.
What's your time frame on these concepts?
Time frame on the concepts. I'm just going to answer personally because we haven't really set a project timeline out. But what I would say is we'll spend most of the rest of this year studying it, talking to the congregation about their appetite for this, their excitement for it, their support for it. Once we feel like we have a significant base of support and a specific direction, how much of this are we going to do, for example? We may not do it all at once. Then we would bring it to the congregation for affirmation, approval, and move forward. And so I would envision late this year into 2019, the work on the fundraising end of it, the capital campaign that would be required for part of it. Somebody asked in the town hall meetings, how are we going to pay for it? And the answer is, don't know yet. Other than, number one, I don't want to take out significant long-term debt to pay for it, in addition to our existing mortgage, with the exception of the possibility of taking out a mortgage for the child care component that we could include. It's not going to be in the plans you'll see right here. It would be new space somewhere else on the campus, which, if we do it right in the business plan, could pay for its own facilities and then some into the ministry moving forward. So that's the only part of it. Personally, just speaking personally, I don't make this call, by the way. The board puts a recommendation to the congregation makes the decision. But if you're asking me as pastor, I would say I would rather not take out any new long-term debt for any of the work that we're talking about just right now. The only exception might be new child care space, which could pay for itself if we do it right. Right? So that would come later this year into maybe 2019. And God willing, if everything goes well, we could be looking at commencing the work in a couple of years. But I'd like to have as much as we can already in hand or committed in solid pledges before we commit to anything financially. So I'm speaking a little ahead of myself, chairman of the board, but that's just what I'm saying, so I don't think you disagree. Yeah, Clarice.
At one of the town hall meetings,
Yep.
you had mentioned the time frame was like 2 to 5 years.
Yeah.
And now it's like this year will be.
With the work I'm saying is probably 2 to 5 years out, the actual construction work. So the planning and the fundraising for it would be in these next 6 months, 18 months, 2 years. We'd have to collectively come to a point where we feel good about whatever the plans are and make the decision to actually do them. What we know is we have about $1 million we have to do. About $1 million. That's parking lot, eventually needs to get fixed. Sanctuary beams. The organ's not going to stop working tomorrow, but we've already had to do about $15,000 of emergency repairs to keep it operational. And it's going to start to fail. The leather on the bottom side of it's 60 years old. Each little pipe up there, I think there's about 1,000 pipes. Each one has a little bag of leather underneath it that pushes air through it. Every one of those needs to be replaced, plus some bellows, plus some straightening and polishing and other things like that. So, which I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just saying that's the reality of having a beautiful piece of an instrument like that. And it's going to serve us well for generations to come. Yeah, David.
Very creative thinking.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Bob is the resident architect who's taken, the board and the staff's kind of just dreams and ideas and actually making it work. Yeah, practical stuff too. Yeah, sure.
We didn't do anything with the beams
Do we have to do anything with the beams in the interim? Don Meinheit is kind of the structural engineer. Any quick answer to that? Not immediately? Not immediately. So eventually, as they fail, what will happen is they'll start to sag down from the center and push out at the ends. Am I correct, Don? I'm not an engineer, so I'm just pretending, right? Which will start to cause contortion, twisting, and sagging in the rest of the structure itself, which will eventually lead to failure of the integrity of the roof, which would lead to leaking and other problems. But that's not tomorrow. That's in a few years. And so we need to get to it soon, but not right away. Am I good? Yep. Yeah, Patty.
So you can tell a tremendous amount of work is put into these plans, and you just mentioned that the team, you elaborate on who's providing input, or you guys are taking these control in this given scenario?
Yeah, so the question is who's the team, who's providing input, right? So in terms of designing the plans, the detailed plans, Bruce, Rudy, Brian, and I have spent probably the most time with Bob to get ready for these meetings. And also a year ago, getting ready to, or 8 months ago, to get the first draft in front of the governing board. Right? So the governing board has said, okay, we know we need to fix all this stuff. Micah, what's your plan? And I said, well, we're working on one. And we'd like to not just fix it. We could raise $1 million, fix everything, and it would look the same. Maybe a little shinier, smooth parking lot, but that would be about the same, right? Which seems kind of boring to me, and a missed opportunity. I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but missed opportunity to also do more to expand the ministry. So the board then, bringing with the executive team, we've then looked at them at some detail with the staff along the way, and the congregation now is seeing some of the detailed drawings for the first time. So we'll just kind of keep talking about this, keep bringing it up in various forums and fashions as we move forward, and ask for feedback. They've been in my office for probably about 4 months, so everyone who ventures into my office has seen them either on the window, it was up for a while, drove Bob nuts because he'd walk up the west side sidewalk and he'd see his plans plastered on my window, but then I just hike up the shades and say, what do you think, right? And if you've been in my office, you've seen them and they've changed because we've just been getting feedback and Bob's been making them better each day. So that's kind of the group right now at the point of it and involved. Yep. Yeah, Steve?
Are you going to talk right now further about, you mentioned the great opportunity with the early childhood education component,
Yep.
which actually brings in money.
Yes.
These are wonderful drawings, wonderful plans. Where's the drawings and the plans for the components for education?
We'll get to that towards the end, right? So I want to finish this set right here, okay? This does not, as I said before, include new child care space, which we haven't mapped out or drawn out. We've conceptually blocked it out in one of 2 areas. Briefly, the 2 areas could be somewhere in that direction, and so we may not build the west parking lot as a full-length parking lot. We could look at a freestanding child care center somewhere in that direction, and then add additional parking elsewhere on campus where it's helpful and needed. Or on the south end of our existing building, we could build an additional wing on the south end that could be used for that and other things. Yes?
I'll just throw it out. What about razzing our present educational facility?
Yeah, you mean demolishing and rebuilding? Yeah. Let me go back to this. Nope, no, I'm not going to have it on there. So, briefly, what I would say is our existing school wings are filled to capacity 12 months out of the year. Right, so there was a period of time where maybe they were quiet in the summer and you could do stuff. We have 2 summer camps that run here. Our own summer camp, which is going strong. Our PDO part of the summer camp right now is got a waiting list, and we've had to add sections to it. We may have to add another one, but we don't have room for it. And the West Wing is dedicated to an external partner, Galileo, which is a revenue generator for us, and they help fill the building. So I say that to say this. If we were to ever entertain demolishing a building and rebuilding it, which we could, we'd need to figure out for 6 months, 12 months, something like that, where do we put all the activity that happens in 12 to 15 classrooms, which is a substantial amount, which we could do through another location that we would temporarily rent or temporary classrooms somewhere on our building. But up to this point, we've not pursued the demolition and reconstruction scenario because we know we don't have somewhere else to put the functions that that happen in there currently. So one of the things could be to build new space, either on the south end or on another location on our campus that could give us room to move into it and then get to the east wing probably first and then the west wing last in terms of demolition and reconstruction. Is that? Just keep going. Yep, all right. Yeah, and we'll keep talking about that moving forward too, Steve. So. Yeah. Part of what we showed, and we're not going to show at this meeting, was we looked at a couple campus master plan scenarios at the town hall meetings. And the long and the short of it was this. On the board, the question came up, what if we were to consider parceling off and selling part of our property as a way to pay for some of this? What would that look like? The long and the short of it would be to say, we all looked at it and said, nobody wants to sell land, so we're not even going to ask to do that, right? But out of that, one of the scenarios that came up was potentially acquiring, somehow or another, Highland Avenue between Clarendon and Oakton, and then the house that sits mostly vacant on the south end of our west parking lot, and looking to build out in that direction. Now, there's a couple of big hurdles to doing this. Number one, we have to figure out how to pay for it. Number two, we have to get the village to agree, and we don't know if either of those are realistic. But what it did is it helped us role play and do the scenario of, do we ever consider seriously selling part of our land to do any of this work? And the short answer was no. And the congregation in the town hall meetings said, we don't really want to even consider that. So actually, I didn't even put it in the presentation for today. I'm just telling you. Yeah, Clarice. Sorry, Clarendon and Olive. Thank you. Yep. So I got my O's switched. So I pointed in the right direction, but I didn't say the right words. So from Olive down to Clarendon over here. So it could come before the congregation at a later date to actually pursue and seek to acquire them, which would allow us to build out from our campus in that direction, which we can't currently, at least not significantly. There's some hurdles to that we need to think about and overcome. But what it did for us is it confirmed we don't want to give up any land we have. We might try to go for more in the way I just described. So then we need to figure out, do we want buildings on the south end by Oakton, as you're suggesting? Do we want a building over on off Highland, and then distribute parking elsewhere in a more accessible manner? For example, down in the south end over here, we never have enough parking for games and other after-school activities. That's a high activity area 5 days a week or more, and we have the least amount of parking there, just the way it's kind of developed. And so we know we need additional parking down that way. And so we're starting to look through those scenarios. So briefly, to conclude, what I'd say is we have a couple of options where we could build new space. And as I said, that would be something we'd consider financing as opposed to fundraising for, at least partially. And so we're going to work on those plans, and we'll also include them in future presentations. And we'll keep talking. Any of you, if you want to come talk to me, I like to talk about this stuff. It's fun. Just dreaming. Okay, let me move into the lobby space just to move forward, and then some of you can go when you're ready. Zooming over to the east, so that vestibule I talked about is the upper left-hand corner. You'd come into a high-soaring atrium welcome area, which would have a lot of space. You'd have coat rooms, you'd have seating areas, kind of like the living room, but several of them. You'd have a cafe area potentially, which is where you could serve coffee and snacks and other things for Sundays and also throughout the week. If we wanted to, we could consider running it almost like a little small business to pay for itself or even generate revenue. We have families who sit here, parents who come, drop off, pick up kids 5, 6, 7 days a week. And so I'm not saying it's Starbucks, but I'm saying we could think about something. The existing bathrooms would stay as there are, but the coat room and that little countertop area there probably would be relocated just to make the most of the floor space itself. As we move west, you can see the circle drive I talked about adding over here off of Highland, and the opportunity to have another secured entrance point there, as well as some enlarged offices. Currently, our offices are scattered all throughout the building, reclaimed closets, some less than ideal situations, but we don't have anywhere else to put the people we already have. And so if we seek to grow, there'll be need for that. What we also struggle with is for you, if you want to come here and have a meeting, or if you want to come and have a Bible study on Sunday morning or during the week, it's not easy to find room, right? So if you're one of those people who do already, you know it's kind of hard and you get shuffled around when stuff's going on. So in some of that space that we're currently calling offices, we could have various meeting rooms, conference room, or other meeting spaces that would be easy to access. There'd be an elevator close by, and you wouldn't have to dodge classroom furniture to be able to use it. It could have a second floor above it, which could include additional meeting room and sitting area, additional office spaces. It could also include, as I said, enclosing the courtyard. So now you're heading straight out here, and you're looking out into the courtyard. Larry and Sharon got married in the courtyard, and they're like, oh no, are we going to lose the courtyard? And I said, no, it just could be used differently, right? It could still be used for weddings. But what we're thinking is that on the second floor, which imagine the balcony but a little bit higher, it would be out into the space and could be a library and learning lab for high-tech sort of learning, which would be a great addition to our school for all ages. Okay? Underneath it would be the opportunity for a stage on the gym end and some storage room. We could see kids ministry fusion happening here. And so the access to it would all be off the lobby, so parents coming could send their kids, here's the fusion check-in desk, and then they could go over to the Life Center or to the sanctuary for worship. It would all be centrally located. And here's how it would work in the space itself. This is a cross-section. And so you see the high roof above, lots of skylights, natural light filtering in. You'd see the library up on this new suspended second floor with the gathering area below, stage again on the south end. And you could have that for banquets, meetings. It would be about the size, when it's all said and done, of our gym number 1. Once you have a stage in there and the staircase and so forth going out. So imagine as you're leaving the sanctuary today, you walk out and there's a high open space with skylights right out in the lobby area, offices to the right, lots of space for community to happen to the left, and then straight out into the enclosed courtyard with the library on the second floor, and then stepping down onto a ground level for this kind of commons area. So it would be designed in such a way that in the future, should we demolish the classrooms per Steve's request, we could still do that, and then we would build the new spaces into it. So that's it as far as the plans themselves. So any questions you have about the rest of what I've showed you after the sanctuary? Yeah, Sharon? Bart's Hall is untouched in these plans, although we do know two scenarios. Potentially, the stained glass windows that are in there currently could come back to the sanctuary from whence they originally had come. So the air conditioning units, those used to be stained glass back in the beginning. And so they could come back into this room. They'd just be up higher a little bit from here. And so you could get a little better lighting into Bart's Hall. And we do envision, one way or another, improving that entrance for security purposes for the school. So whether it's part of this project or just something we do anyway, we're going to do some changes down to the entrance area for security purposes. Right? All right, that's the last of the picture. So you guys have a lot to think about and pray about. Okay, here's what we're going to ask you to do. We think God's going to do immeasurably more. We're excited about what that could entail. He's blessed us already in this past year. We're thankful for that, and in the centuries before us. In the future, we're going to ask you to lean in, step up, and then go out. What that means is lean in through these conversations. You'll hear us keep talking about them and dreaming about them. You'll see videos, you'll see emails, you'll see stuff probably out in the lobby when that time comes for you to interact with. Engage in the conversation, engage in prayer. Ask God to give leadership clear direction. Ask God to bless the congregation as He sees fit. Stepping up, the time will come where we'll ask you to help, whether it's through ministry that's happening here, whether it's, so talking about like our Night to Shine coming up, we'll need a lot of help for that, and in other areas, as well as in financial support. This year has been a year of blessing and favor. We want to see that continue, so don't just ease up and lean back, but continue on steadfast in how God has been using you already. And then going out to love and to serve the people who are close to you but far from Jesus, right? That's what we're here to do. And that's true in the people in your home, in your neighborhood, in your workplace, in your hair salon, in the grocery store, wherever it is that Jesus has people and you, He has work for you to do. And it's not out of your reach. You can do this. It looks like a kind word, a helping hand, an offer to pray, friendship, right? Kind of the stuff we see Jesus doing, minus maybe the miracles, which I haven't figured out yet either. But I can do a few things pretty well, and God will bless that abundantly. All right? So let's pray about all that, and we'll call it a day. Jesus, we give you thanks for this day, for the friends that have been here, and especially those who have stayed to the end and engaged in this. I thank you for them. Everyone who's come for part of this conversation, I pray that it would be blessed as it continues and carries forward, and you would use us to do amazing things, immeasurably more than we could ask or imagine, not for us, but for your glory and for the good of everyone around us. And for this world that you desperately love. So we submit this in the afternoon and everything ahead of us to your care, asking you to guide us and direct us. And we pray this all in Jesus' name. And everyone agreed and said, amen. All right, this closes our meeting. Thanks. We do have some of the plans in paper form. If you want to come up and ask questions, you're welcome to do that. That's always fun. Otherwise, have a great day.